Hi everybody, it's Kupillas, and I'm going to paint some bananas today using my Viviva watercolor set. I'm using the Viviva original pans, and I've just sketched it out lightly, and I'm actually doing this from memory today. So this is just a fun exercise to bananas are bananas, right? So just to kind of see, just to see what I can do. Anyway, I am adding in my lightest tones of yellow. I love the Viviva yellow. It is like the brightest yellow that I've ever experienced with watercolor. And then I've added a little tiny bit of purple to this one that's in the back because it's so deeply in shadow. I'm going to change my mind later. You'll see about where I put some of these shadows. And again, please be kind because I'm doing this without using the reference photo. So pretty much just from memory. And I have just the basic shapes of the bananas here. The bananas actually went bad. So I had eaten some, but then the rest of them I had to get rid of. So I did have a couple photos. Also, I had painted them in gouache first. So it's not like I didn't have any idea of how to approach this, but as you guys know, watercolor is very, very different than gouache. And in gouache, I paint a lot of, I would say, dark to light versus in watercolor, I mostly paint light to dark. But I also will, when I want the bleeds, I'll punch in the color. So now I'm adding more of a purpley brown to the undersides, the sides that aren't as lit, and you'll see later I lose that beautiful light bit at the top of that banana to the right, which is the one that should be the most in the light. So I was really bummed about that, but this is real life. This is how it really goes. I heard a watercolor artist say one time that watercolor is like chess, and that you make a move and then the paint makes a move on the page and then you react to it. And sometimes the way you react is by, ripping it up and throwing it away. But we'll see how this one goes. So again, I'm just touching in some more. That's my dark brown. I've got a medium brown and a dark brown in this Viviva kit. So I'm just touching that in. Now I've mixed a black because the original pan set doesn't have a black. So the way I mix black is I take a purple, a blue, and a brown quite often, and very little water. And I can make it more blue or more brown depending on, what kind of tone I want to the brown, what temperature, and so forth. So I've switched brushes. By the way, in case you're wondering, I'm using the Princeton Aqua Elite series. I have two size brushes that I'm using today. One is the pointed round, which I just love it. This is the pointed round I'm using right now. And the one I used earlier is just a round. And I think it's a size 10, and this is a size 6, I want to say. I don't like to use a lot of teeny tiny brushes. This is only a 7x10 piece of paper that I'm working on. And by the way, this is the Meeden watercolor block that I'm using, and I like it a lot. It's very similar to Arches or Arch, if you pronounce it properly, which I usually don't because I'm an American. So you can see my little palette. It's just a plastic plate that I've had for like a year or 2 or 3. I just wash it. A little more brownish purple into push that one into the back. So the one thing I love and also find challenging about Viviva is that because they're pant paints and they're dyes, it's hard to really get a thick goopy mixture. I mean, you could get a thick undiluted sort of mixture out of the tube for sure. You can get, I think, more of a vibrant mixture of Viviva if you use very little water, but it's still a pan paint, and so it's very hard to grab, a lot. And so putting a thick bit into a wet area, which is one of my favorite moves to make in watercolor. It's nearly impossible with Viviva, but at the same time, what you get with Viviva, because you're unable to really dump a lot of thick goopy paint into a wet area, what you do get is you can put like a medium thick or a thin mixture into a wet area, and you get these beautiful, beautiful bleeds and cauliflowers and like areas where the color just does unexpected things, especially when it dries. And you can see that in the areas where you see the dark against the light here. So I just touched some more browns in. Again, I'm not following the photo because I'm not looking at it. So I think I'm going to make these look a little bit more like they did at the end of their life cycle versus when I first took the picture. I'm just trying to get a lot of texture and nuance and things happening in, but still retain the general feeling that these are bananas. And by the way, these are stubby little bananas. I got them at the Mexican market down the block, and they call them burros. Burros. I can't roll my R's. So I'm just blending a little bit. Things have dried a bit on the page by now because I was working on the stems. By the way, I learned last year that my whole life I've been eating bananas incorrectly. And that just like monkeys, you're supposed to hold it by the stem and peel it from that little knotty bit at the tip. And that gives you a built-in handle. And it has changed my life. So I had a cool bit, and then I decided to warm it up a little bit. So I put more brown versus that sort of bluey purple I had in the shadow. Also, I had a little yellow bleed there. Don't worry about that. I'll fix that later. Sorry, I'm a little bit out of frame here too, by the way. You'll see all the shadow at the end. So now I'm using purple with maybe a touch of blue. I'm going to drop in more color to it in a little bit, just to add a cast shadow, because these bananas are not floating and levitating. They're sitting on a surface. So I just added a little more blue to get like a balance of cool and warm, which I think is the most interesting. Now, I'm sorry, but I had to tilt the paper, because if I didn't tilt the block, I really do run the risk of sort of colors running upwards and really making a mess of things. So now I'm adding more shadows at the stems. I'm not really sure how successful these are. Touching in more and more color. I'm starting to really like this. Adding a tiny bit more definition there. And I like to paint in a semi-abstract way. So I know that there's a lot of people that don't, but if you look at the areas where I've let things sort of bleed together a lot, and I'm not necessarily caring about the cast shadow from one banana to the next, for example, I do that on purpose. I think it's much more interesting to hint at things than to be super literal all the time about everything in art. So I like to kind of keep things a little bit, let's say, rough or messy. Now I'm just touching because those spots came out way too sharp. I didn't like them, so they had time to soak in a little bit, just a second. And so I was able to sort of just mush them down or blot them out a little bit with my finger. Now I'm adding a couple more because they didn't land exactly where I wanted them to. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll cut out a piece of tracing paper so that I can do spatter with a little bit more of a controlled area, and I don't get it so much into the background, because you probably noticed before I had to sort of pick up some color quickly. But the thing about Viviva is that they're staining colors, so it's very hard to kind of lift them out. Even using Magic Eraser, which is a go-to of mine, it's hard to lift out little mistakes and things like that. So you got to pick it up like right away, but I was lazy today. You made it this far. Thank you so much for watching. Here's my finished picture. And don't forget, use my affiliates code ANN10 for 10% off everything in your cart at vivivacolors.com.